Once upon a time, there lived a couple who lived in a big city. Their names were Abayomi and Ireti, and they had been married for over 12 years. However, their marriage began to go through a hard time when they lost their newborn baby. Abayomi never spoke of the incident, but his wife Ireti narrated to everyone that cared to listen that their baby was kidnapped on their way back from the hospital. According to Ireti, on the evening when the sad incident happened, Abayomi was adamant that they wait until morning before leaving the hospital. The sun had already set, and Abayomi felt that it wasn't safe to drive through the city with a newborn baby. But Ireti, exhausted and eager to bring their baby home, insisted, "I just want to sleep in my own bed." She had pleaded softly, cradling their baby boy in her arms. "Let's go home, Abayomi. We'll be fine," she said. Reluctantly, Abayomi agreed. They carried the bags while she held their sleeping son, and they walked into the night to their car. A few streets away from the hospital, it happened. A car screeched to a halt beside them as marksmen jumped out of their car with guns. Before Abayomi could react, one of them struck him to the ground with the back of his gun, whilst the other ripped the baby out of Ireti's arms. She screamed out loud, a scream that echoed into the night and still rang in her ears till date. From that day on, Abayomi never looked at her the same. He never raised his hand, but his words became weapons, sharp, cold, and wounding. "If only you listened to me, all this wouldn't have happened. But no, you always know better." Ireti tried to explain, tried to grieve with him, but he wouldn't let her. He built a wall of silence and work, locking her out of his heart completely. Every corner of their once joyful home now felt haunted. The nursery remained untouched, frozen in time. Tiny clothes folded neatly, a baby crib that never rocked again. Ireti would sometimes stand in the doorway, holding a small blue socks in her hands as tears poured down her face, whilst Abayomi walked past her like she wasn't even there. One night, unable to bear it anymore, Ireti decided to confront her husband. "Abayomi," she whispered, her voice trembling, "please, I miss him too." He didn't look at her, but he replied, "Then maybe you should have listened to me." "I lost him too," she cried, stepping in front of him. "You think I don't relive that moment every single day? I see his face when I close my eyes. I hear his cry in my dreams. I ache, Abayomi. I ache in places I didn't know existed." Finally, Abayomi looked at her, but his eyes weren't filled with love. They were hollow. "You had one job, Ireti, to protect our son, but you failed," he said as he walked out on her. The words landed like thunder as Ireti staggered back, her hands on her chest, as if she was trying to hold together her broken heart. In that moment, she realized that she hadn't only lost the son, she had lost the man who once vowed to protect her, the man who used to kiss her forehead and call her his everything, the man who held her hand and promised to love her no matter what. Abayomi was gone. What stood before her now was a stranger who she could not recognize. Days turned into weeks, and the silence between them grew thicker, heavier, like a dark fog that swallowed every ounce of warmth. They lived like shadows in the same house, crossing paths without truly seeing each other. Ireti tried to hold on. She cooked his favorite meals, left kind messages on his desk, and even suggested that they go for therapy. But Abayomi dismissed her every attempt. "There's nothing a therapist can say that will bring back my son," he said one evening when Ireti brought his best friend Shegun to plead with him. Shegun did everything within his power to convince Abayomi to seek help, but it was like speaking to a man made of stone. "I don't need help, Shegun. I need time away from this mad woman. She's insane, Shegun. I don't know why no one else is saying it." Ireti stood there, her eyes filled with tears as she watched her husband walk out of the door. Her heart shattered into a million pieces, each one echoing the sound of the door as it slammed shut behind him. Ireti fell to the floor, gripping her chest gasping for air that refused to fill her lungs. The silence he left behind was louder than his words, because now Ireti knew that it was final. Her husband Abayomi had chosen to leave, to abandon not just the memory of their son, but the woman who had carried and loved him every second of his short life. The days that followed were a blur. Ireti moved through the house like a ghost, the weight of grief pressing heavily on her shoulders. Her mother, on hearing all that happened, moved in to live with her. Ireti was the only family she had left, and she could not risk losing her. She watched her daughter with the eyes of a mother who had known sorrow, but this was a kind of pain that she could not fix. Ireti barely ate. She barely spoke. At night, her cries would echo through the house as if it came from the walls themselves. Her mother would sit by her bedside, gently stroking her hair, whispering prayers through her own tears. But still, Ireti clung to the hope that one day her son and husband would return. She began going on TV programs, speaking publicly about what happened. "If you've seen him," she would say, her voice cracking, "if you know anything, please come forward. My baby deserves to come home." The media picked up her story. Some offered sympathy, others criticized. There were those who speculated, who pointed fingers, but Ireti did not care. She only wanted one thing, to find her son. Her friend Lola, heartbroken by what Ireti had become, finally visited one morning unannounced. She brought a basket of fruits, but her eyes held something heavier. "Ireti," she said gently, sitting across from her on the couch. "I watched your interview last night." Ireti nodded faintly, her fingers clutching the edge of the baby blanket that she always kept on her lap. Lola hesitated, then reached for her hand. "You've been fighting. You've been so brave. But it's been over a year, and I think maybe it's time for you to start healing." Ireti blinked at her. "You want me to forget him?" "No," Lola whispered. "Never. But I want you to live again. For yourself, for the love you still have to give. You can't stay buried in this forever. Ireti, your baby wouldn't want that. Neither would God." The words hung in the air like smoke, but Ireti did not reply. In a bid to make Ireti move, Lola reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the photo gallery and handed the screen to Ireti. "I didn't want to show you this, so," Lola said softly, "but I think you need to see it." Ireti took the phone confused, but the moment her eyes landed on the screen, her heart dropped. There he was, her husband Abayomi, smiling and standing beside a woman she did not recognize. Her hand rested on his chest with a familiarity that cut through her like a knife. Ireti could not believe her eyes. She had spent months hoping and praying that her husband and son would return. Little did she know that while she drowned in sorrow, her husband Abayomi had moved on. Her hands trembled as she zoomed in on the image. The woman's smile, as Abayomi's arms draped casually over her shoulder, filled her with intense anger. "I need to see him," she said angrily to Lola, who convinced her otherwise. "Abayomi has moved on, and I'll advise you to do same," Lola said to Ireti, who took another close look at the image, where she saw a baby in the background. "That's my baby," she said to Lola, pointing at the picture on Lola's phone. Lola could not believe her ears. She snatched the phone from Ireti's hand and took a good look at it. There was a baby in the background, but Lola could not say for sure if it was a girl or a boy. "Abayomi had the mind to steal my baby for his mistress," she said angrily as she picked up her car keys and drove with Lola straight to their guest house, where Abayomi was putting up with his new mistress. Ireti barged into the house and met his mistress Amaka, who was alone with the child. She grabbed the child from her arms and realized that it was a boy. He looked so much like her son, and Ireti could not help but cry. "How could you steal my son?" she screamed out at Amaka, who stood there confused, trying to understand what was happening. "That's my son," Amaka said to Ireti, who beat her up mercilessly as she stormed out of the house with the child. Lola screamed and begged for her to stop, but Ireti refused to listen. She got into her car with the child and drove straight to her house. Ireti locked the doors and shut the blinds as she held the child in her arms, rocking him and humming lullabies that only a mother could know. Her mother watched from a distance, unsure of what to believe. Could this really be her son? She asked Lola, who shook her head in confusion. "I'm scared, Mama. I think Ireti has crossed the line this time," she said to Ireti's mother, who gently approached her daughter to talk to her. "My daughter, are you really sure that this baby is yours?" she asked Ireti, who showed her a birthmark that her baby had on his arm that was also on her own arm. "I'm sure, Mama. This child is mine, and Abayomi knows it. He staged the kidnapping and gave my baby to his mistress. That's why he never cared for me or even acknowledged my grief. He needed me to believe that I was to blame so that I'll stay silent and broken. But now I know the truth." Ireti's mother sank into the couch, her eyes wide and her hand trembling as it reached towards the child's arm. And there it was, a small birthmark, identical to the birthmark on Ireti's own arm. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Lola sat down heavily as she thought aloud. "This can't be. Could it? I never imagined he could be so heartless," Ireti whispered, her voice cracking. "But it makes sense now. He always said it was my fault. He never searched, never cried, because he knew where my son was." Just then, there was a loud bang at the door. It was the police. "Ireti Oladipo, the police called from outside. We need to open the door now." Lola jumped to her feet and ran to the window. Several police officers were standing outside, and Abayomi was also there, his face hard and unreadable. "They're here for the baby," Lola whispered as Ireti stood still. The child cradled in her arms as her heart pounded in her ears. "I won't give him up," she said, stepping back. "I won't. He's my child. He was stolen from me. Mama, help me," she cried, looking at her mother. "You know this child is mine, Mama." Her mother held her gaze, pain and uncertainty swelling in her eyes. "Then we will prove it, my daughter," she said, "but not by running. You need to let the truth defend you." Her mother continued as she ordered Lola to open up the door. The police swung into action and grabbed the baby from Ireti's arms. "He's mine!" Ireti cried continuously as she tried to convince the officers, who cuffed her arms and tried to take her away. Abayomi walked up to her and warned her to stop her pretense. "Stop all this your shenanigans and tell everyone how you killed your baby. This child you are claiming is not yours and you know it," he said to Ireti, who bursted out in tears and accused him of staging the entire kidnapping and handing her son over to his mistress Amaka. "How dare you kidnap my baby for your mistress?" she asked Abayomi, who insisted that they both do a DNA test of the child. "I'll prove to you that the child is mine," Ireti yelled out angrily, revealing that the child had a unique birthmark that they both shared. As Ireti stood there fuming in anger, she felt a sharp pain in her head and began to scream. Before anyone knew what was happening, she slumped to the floor unconscious and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors wheeled her into the emergency ward as they did all they could to stabilize her. Lola walked back and forth in the corridor whilst Ireti's mother sat quietly, eyes closed, as she whispered a prayer underneath her breath. Hours later, a doctor emerged from the room to meet with them. "Is she going to be okay?" Lola asked the doctor, who informed them that she was stable. "However, we found something that we never expected." The doctor hesitated for a moment, then continued. "Ireti has a very rare condition that was triggered by intense trauma, usually involving loss. The mind, in an effort to protect itself, rewrites the memory and fabricates a new reality in the mind. In Ireti's case, she constructed an elaborate story of a kidnapping to avoid facing the truth." Lola stared at him, her mouth open in shock. "You're saying the baby was not kidnapped?" The doctor nodded. "I checked the hospital records, and Ireti's baby died minutes after delivery. But something happened in the delivery room. When she held the lifeless body of her son, her mind could not take it. The trauma fractured her reality and created an alternative reality for her, where her baby was kidnapped. It's extremely rare, but it happens, especially in mothers suffering from intense trauma. Her mind rewrote the truth to protect her heart from completely breaking. Lola stumbled into the nearest chair, her hand covering her mouth. So all this while she was lying, she truly believed her son was alive? There was no car, no gunman, no kidnapping. Yes, the doctor nodded. She wasn't pretending. To Ireti, that boy is her son. Every tear she cried, every word she spoke was real. Her love for him was real. Her pain was real. But the child in question is not her biological child. The room fell into silence as Ireti's mother began to sob quietly. "Oh, my poor child. She has suffered so much," she said as Ireti woke up from her deep sleep, asking for her baby. "He's not here," she said, sitting up abruptly. Lola approached her quietly, her eyes swollen from crying. "Ireti," she said, her voice low, "we need to talk." "I want my baby," Ireti said, her voice trembling. "Tell them to bring my baby to me. Please, Lola, you saw the birthmark. You saw him. He's mine." Lola walked closer, holding her friend's hand. "I did see the birthmark. I did see the child. But I also saw something else, Ireti. I saw your pain. And now I know the truth behind it." Ireti's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, Lola?" she asked. The doctor explained everything. About your condition. About the trauma. "Ireti, your baby did not make it that day. He passed away that night, just minutes after delivery." Ireti stared at her blankly. "No, that's not true." "I know it's hard to accept," Lola whispered. "But your mind, your heart, could not take the truth. So it created a story, a reality where your baby was stolen." "No," Ireti screamed out angrily. "You're lying. All of you. He's alive. I held him. They took him from me." Nurses rushed in to calm her down as she wailed uncontrollably. Lola stepped back as tears poured down her face as she watched her best friend break all over again. Only this time, it wasn't from holding on to a lie. This time, it was from finally being forced to confront the truth. Ireti insisted on taking the DNA test. She had to prove to them that the child was truly hers. So her friend Lola approached Abayomi to request for the test. Abayomi agreed to the DNA test on the condition that he too would do the test to prove to Ireti that the child was his and not hers. So, a DNA test was ordered, and the world waited. The public waited, and so did Lola and Ireti's mother, who could not wait to finally know the truth. After 14 days, the results came in, and everyone was so shocked at the result. Ireti was not the mother, and Abayomi was not the father either. Silence shook the entire room as everyone froze in shock. "I don't understand," Ireti whispered as she held the paper tightly, as though the result would change if she held it tighter. "The baby, he looks like me and has the same birthmark." But the truth was right there in black and white. Lola covered her mouth, her eyes full of tears. Abayomi stood in the corner as he stared at the floor, wishing that the ground would open up and swallow him. Then Amaka spoke up, her voice shaking. "I'm so sorry, Abayomi. I thought you were the father," she said as Abayomi insisted on knowing who the father was. Amaka broke down completely as she revealed to him that his best friend Shegun was the one responsible for the pregnancy. The entire room fell silent as Abayomi could not believe his ears. Amaka began to plead for forgiveness, knowing how hurt Abayomi was by the revelation. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she cried, revealing that it was only one time. "I thought the baby was yours," she said as Abayomi walked out on them without looking back. He didn't shout or argue. He just walked away like a man who had lost everything. Ireti, however, was so broken. The last thread holding her together snapped. But it was also the moment everything became clear to her. She remembered how her son died and how broken she felt by his death. What had happened was that during her pregnancy, Abayomi warned her not to consume alcohol, but Ireti ignored his concerns and hid to take some alcohol. One evening, she returned home with a sharp pain in her abdomen. Abayomi rushed her to the hospital, but by the time they got to the hospital, the doctors could do nothing. The baby, their precious baby boy, was gone. His tiny lungs never fully took their first breath, and in that moment, something inside Ireti fractured. But Abayomi never forgot. To him, it wasn't just about a glass of wine or a few careless hours. It was about watching the woman he loved ignore his pleas and then act like she was blameless. While she told the ridiculous story of their baby being kidnapped, Abayomi's anger boiled, wondering what kind of a woman he married. He could not understand how she would tell a lie and even begin to live that lie, instead of taking responsibility for her actions. That was the weight Abayomi had been carrying. That was the justification behind his anger for all this time. To everyone else, he looked cold, distant, cruel even. But deep down, he was a man gutted by the belief that the woman he married was a pathetic liar. That's why he couldn't look at her. That's why he walked away. That's why in his pain and bitterness, he sought comfort in Amaka, a decision that would only compound his heartbreak. When he discovered that the child he thought was a second chance was not his, and the friend he trusted had betrayed him in the worst way possible. It was a tragedy of loss, guilt, and brokenness on all sides. In the days that followed, Ireti was admitted into intensive therapy, her mind too fragile to face the world just yet. Lola stayed by her side, as did her mother, determined to help her find her way back to reality, one truth at a time. Abayomi, on the other hand, vanished from the public eye. He left the city with no trace. Amaka was left alone with the child she now had to raise, knowing that her lies had destroyed everything. And Ireti, after weeks of darkness, finally took her first step towards healing. For the first time, she allowed herself to truly grieve, not for a child that had been stolen, but for a child that she lost. It wasn't easy. Some days, she could not get out of bed. Some days, she cried so hard that she couldn't breathe. But despite it all, she kept going. In time, Ireti found peace, not because she forgot, but because she finally decided to face it. The lesson to be learned from this story is that people grieve differently. We should learn not to jump into conclusions in life, as some things are not as it seems. Unspoken grief can tear lives apart, but healing begins the moment we face the truth. No matter what happens, truth sets the heart free. Only by confronting our deepest wounds can we begin to rebuild, not the life we lost, but a one filled with strength, hope, and resilience.